Before the sun had fully risen over London, a single royal statement detonated like a bomb across every screen on the planet. And at the center of the blast was one name people thought could never shock them again: Meghan Markle. This wasn't gossip trickling out through palace leaks. This wasn't a rumor whispered by insiders. This was the crown slamming the door shut permanently. And the fallout made everything that came before look like rehearsal. By 7:46 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, the message was live. No soft language, no velvet gloves, one brutal declaration ripped through royal history. All institutional ties between the crown and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were severed, effective immediately. But that wasn't the part that sent social media into cardiac arrest. The real shockwave came next. Custody, guardianship, authority. All shifting in a way the modern monarchy had not dared to attempt since 1936. Within minutes, hashtags were erupting, screenshots flew, timelines refreshed like panic buttons, and suddenly a question no one expected to ask was everywhere. Did the crown just take control of Meghan Markle's children? Behind the scenes, this moment had been brewing for 10 long, tense months. Months of quiet alarms, sealed files, and mounting concern inside palace walls. While the public saw glamorous appearances, podcast teases, and international travel, the institution was watching something else entirely. Branding violations, title misuse, silence where parental accountability should have been, and then came Dubai. January 24th, a luxury resort, flashing cameras, champagne flutes clinking under chandeliers. Meghan Markle steps onto the stage, smiling, confident, magnetic, and introduces herself not as a former royal, not as a philanthropist, but as the mother of the next generation of royal changemakers. No children present, no clearance, no coordination. Just one phrase that sent emergency calls racing through royal legal offices within hours. Because inside the crown's confidential agreements, one rule was sacred: the children were never to be leveraged. Behind closed doors, Princess Anne did not hesitate. Files were pulled, evidence stacked, marketing decks surfaced, decks that labeled a child as market-ready, travel documents listing titles that had been revoked years earlier, promotional language that blurred lineage with lifestyle branding. Each discovery tightened the noose. While Meghan was globetrotting, another figure was conspicuously absent: Prince Harry. 3 direct attempts from King Charles himself went unanswered. Where were the children? Who was overseeing their schooling, their care, their stability? Silence. Then, photographic proof surfaced. Harry alone in Las Vegas, attending a private summit, avoiding questions, emotionally unmoored, according to palace insiders. That silence mattered, because under international child protection frameworks, absence is not just emotional, it is legal. By January 26th, Princess Anne submitted a dossier so explosive it reactivated a constitutional clause untouched for nearly a century. Page after page laid bare what the crown would later describe not as narrative conflict, but neglect disguised as motherhood. The language was surgical, the conclusion devastating. The decision was finalized 2 nights later at Sandringham. 5 people, 1 room, no leaks, no press: King Charles, Princess Anne, Prince William, Princess Catherine, and the crown's top constitutional legal mind. The question on the table was not reputation, it was duty. Protect the institution or protect the children. Princess Catherine spoke last, calm, precise, unflinching. These children, she said, were being shaped by chaos, not continuity, identity without grounding, exposure without protection, and when the vote came, it was unanimous. By the time the public statement dropped, the machinery was already in motion. Guardianship transferred, oversight committees formed, media restrictions activated, a new trust established to shield the children from commercial exploitation, and a figure quietly stepped into a role no one saw coming. Catherine, Princess of Wales, now legally designated as guardian of royal succession. The reaction was immediate and nuclear. Supporters called it protection. Critics screamed control. Meghan's allies whispered retaliation. Her detractors called it inevitable. Meanwhile, corporate partners froze. Streaming giants paused negotiations. Gulf investors backed away. One executive summed it up bluntly: until Meghan's rights are clarified, no one is touching anything tied to those children. Then came the financial hammer. Monthly contributions mandated, full disclosure demanded, contracts leveraging royal identity ordered terminated within 21 days, non-compliance, international enforcement, asset freezes, court action across borders, and still, no statement from Harry. And sympathy doesn't dissolve signed agreements. In royal history, there have been scandals, abdications, divorces, betrayals, but this was something else. This was the monarchy redefining where family ends and institution begins. Not with exile, not with silence, but with paperwork, protocols, and a line drawn around 2 children who never asked to be born into a battlefield. Behind palace walls, aides described the moment as heartbreaking but necessary. The phrase repeated in briefings was simple: protection over perception. And perhaps that's why this story hit differently. There were no balcony waves, no dramatic confrontations, just quiet signatures, sealed envelopes, and a future being rerouted in real time. As February moved forward, hearings loomed in both the UK and the US. Meghan's legal team prepared arguments around jurisdiction and parental rights. The Crown prepared documentation about lineage, identity protection, and prior contractual consent. Two worlds. Two definitions of duty, one set of children at the center. The fairy tale narrative that once captivated the world had fully collapsed. In its place stood something colder, sharper, and far more real: consequence. And whether history will judge this moment as overreach or overdue protection remains to be seen. But one thing is undeniable: the Crown didn't just respond to a crisis. It rewrote the rules of what happens when royal bloodlines collide with modern branding, and chose, for once, to fight not for image, but for childhood. Behind palace gates, aides described the mood not as triumphant but resolute. This was not revenge. This was recalibration, a line drawn not against a woman but against a pattern. As the dust settled, one truth became impossible to ignore. The monarchy had done the unthinkable. It chose structure over sentiment, children over optics. And in doing so, it rewrote the rules of royal consequence. But this was only the beginning, because what happened next? The legal counterstrikes, the memoir threats, the behind-the-scenes negotiations would push this saga into even darker, more explosive territory. The palace thought the statement would end the chaos. It didn't. It lit a fuse. Within hours of the Crown's declaration, Meghan's legal team moved fast. Not with a press conference, not with tears, but with paperwork. A cease and desist letter slammed into the royal courts claiming reputational damage, emotional distress, and what her lawyers described as an unlawful institutional overreach into maternal sovereignty. The language was fiery. The intent was clear: she wasn't going down quietly. But inside the monarchy's legal war room, the response was ice cold. Because buried in years of agreements, memoranda, and post-exit negotiations was something Meghan's side hoped would stay invisible: a clause signed back in 2022. A clause that limited the commercial use of royal ties. A clause that warned violations could affect future custodial negotiations. A clause she signed anyway. And now, that ink was louder than any interview she could give. While Meghan's camp prepared for a public narrative battle, the Crown went somewhere far more dangerous. International enforcement, diplomatic channels opened quietly, legal recognition packets crossed borders, California courts were notified, Commonwealth jurisdictions were alerted. This wasn't just palace drama anymore. This was cross-border legal architecture locking into place. Behind closed doors, companies that once lined up to work with the Sussex brand began backing away like guests leaving a party after a fight breaks out. Streaming executives who once saw royal sparkle now saw legal smoke. A planned children's media venture, frozen, brand collaborations tied to next-generation royal voices, quietly shelved. No one wanted to gamble on a custody dispute with constitutional implications. And then came the number that made even hardened insiders blink: £36,000 per month. That was the mandated contribution into the Children's Protected Trust. Not a donation, not optional, court-ordered, alongside a full financial audit of any earnings connected, even indirectly, to the children's names, images, or implied status. Every deal, every deck, every pitch. For the first time since stepping away from royal life, Meghan wasn't defining the terms. The institution was. Prince Harry, meanwhile, remained a ghost in the narrative. No interviews, no statements, no social posts. Insiders whispered he had stepped back from Archewell operations entirely. Others claimed he was in private crisis talks, desperate to find a path to see his children under the new structure. But palace sources were firm: visitation was possible, under supervision, evaluation, and strict compliance with the guardianship framework. The door wasn't locked, but it was heavily guarded. As legal teams clashed across continents, a quieter transformation was unfolding far from the spotlight. The Custodial Oversight Council, led by Catherine, began building what they called a stability-first life for the children. Therapists consulted, educators briefed, digital exposure shut down, no cameras, no branding, no monetized childhood. For the first time, the children at the center of the storm were being treated not as symbols, not as leverage, but simply as kids who needed routine, privacy, and emotional anchoring. And that contrast between commercial narrative and institutional protection became the moral battlefield of the entire saga. Public opinion, shockingly, leaned toward the palace. Polls showed overwhelming support for shielding the children from further exposure. Even critics of the monarchy admitted the move looked less like control and more like intervention. Commentators who once slammed the institution for coldness were now calling it decisive. But Meghan wasn't finished. Word leaked that her upcoming memoir had shifted tone. What was once rumored to be reflective was now described as corrective. Sources said chapters detailed private grievances, power struggles, and what she viewed as systemic silencing. The working title? Unconfirmed. But insiders claimed one theme ran through it all. She would not let the Crown write the final version of her story. The palace, however, wasn't playing the narrative game anymore. They were playing the legal one. Because once guardianship frameworks activate, memoirs don't change custody. Interviews don't override court filings.